Welcome to the podcast. Today's authentic falconer is Eric Ariyoshi, and I want to thank him for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, Eric is a specialist. He really likes to fly peregrine falcons on ducks, and he's been a falconer for over 20 years. So I'm hoping to get some information for the person trying to jump into switching over to a falcon or just starting out on a falcon. So we're going to discuss his transitions, the differences, and then also a couple common difficulties that most people have to overcome, and kind of like some tips how to correct them. So I'm really excited that Eric's here to help us out with that. And I definitely want to start with your journey into how you got into falconry. So could you tell us about, the very beginning, what got you into falconry?
Yeah, sure. I think it's like a lot of falconers. I think, as a kid, I was really into the outdoors and nature and bugs and snakes and frogs and all that sort of thing. And I was fortunate enough to live next to a large regional park where I could every day, when I was little, just run around. It's a different time. The parents would just let you out and say, be home for dinner
nice.
time. Yeah. And then when I got bigger, I always had that park just literally next door to my home. So I spent a lot of time in the outdoors playing, collecting animals, and made the normal progression. I think a lot of falconers go through this process where when they're really little, they're into insects and bugs, and then that kind of evolves into like frogs and amphibians, and then often that goes to reptiles and like snakes and lizards. And then at some point I progressed to where I started noticing these red-tailed hawks and these kestrels and these large birds kind of flying up in the sky, and I started noticing these nests in the trees. So I started becoming really intrigued. And then I saw a National Geographic magazine article about falconry, and it actually, I years later I learned it actually featured a local, very well-known falconer named Gary Beeman, who actually lived in the Bay Area. And these pictures just completely captured me and made my mind go, wow, I can't believe people do this. So that kind of evolved. And then when I was about 11 or 12, I basically nagged my parents to the point where they helped me. It was a different time. Back then, you couldn't go on the internet and say, falconry, what is this? It's completely different. There was so little information. And so they helped me write some letters. I wrote a letter to the California Department of Fish and Game, and they sent me back basically a packet that basically said, well, falconry is legal, and these are the steps that you have to do. And in that packet, there were some contacts for getting involved if you want to get involved in it. So okay. I wrote typed some letters. Literally, my mom helped me type some letters and got some contacts, and eventually got hooked up with some local falconers who were nice enough to take me out as a kid. And so very different process, a lot harder to get into and find information about what the sport was. But I think it was outside of the technology, it was a pretty normal process a lot of falconers go through.
Okay. So was it a meet you went to meet your sponsor, or a group, or you just kind of?
No, I sent away some letters with like, a stamp and everything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there was a gentleman, Craig Culver, who at that time was involved in NAFA, who sent me back and he said, hey, here are 3 buddies I've got in the Bay Area that are pretty close to you. Why don't you give them a call? And I made some phone calls, and I eventually was connected to one of the nicest guys I've ever known in the sport named Ed Eng. He lived in the local area, and he would take me out. Obviously I couldn't drive at that point, so my dad or mom would drive out, and we'd drive to some random area, and he would let me watch his goshawk and his falcons fly. So that's how it started.
Nice. And what was the first bird that you actually trained?
I started with kestrels, and the reason was prior to actually getting licensed, I had done a lot of rehab work, kind of volunteer work, and I always knew I wanted to fly falcons. I've done, believe it or not, people who know me will probably be shocked, I actually have trained hawks, but the vast majority of my falconry experience has been around falcons, and I knew I wanted to train falcons. I knew I wanted to move on to merlins immediately, so I flew kestrels to start.
So what was it that you knew? Why would you gravitate towards a falcon versus a hawk? Like, what was in your mind?
I think I was a little different in that before I actually started flying, back then, the age requirements now are much less. When I started, you had to be 16 to get a
okay.
license. So,
Yeah.
so I had a lot of years going out and watching other falconers fly. So before I even considered getting a bird for myself, I'd watched, Harris hawks fly and red tails and goshawks and peregrines and prairies, and I'd seen a wide variety of birds fly. So I kind of already knew what appealed to me the most, kind of aesthetically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just like the teardrop falling from the sky, smashing
Yeah.
a duck or
Yeah,
something
yeah,
like
I
that,
did.
as
I,
opposed
yeah,
to
I did
the rabbit.
my childhood was, probably a little different because a lot of people don't realize, California in the United States was where kind of duck hawking was founded and really established.
Oh,
And so I was lucky enough that I went out with a lot of really good longwingers who didn't mind a little kid tagging along to see, some really good duck flights and pheasant flights as well. Back then, pheasants were doing really well in the state. Unfortunately, they're all gone. But
yeah.
so I was fortunate enough to see how it's done when I was at a pretty young age.
Okay. I've done more dirt hawking, in my experience, and I've only gone out with a few, peregrine falconers, and I have yet to see an awesome duck smash, like close enough where you can actually kind of feel it in your heart. So how often does that happen? And do you remember like your first experience?
Yeah, I definitely do. I definitely remember seeing some amazing flights. And the thing about long wings is I think people think it's this extremely difficult thing, and it's not. The fundamental process is the same. It's just different. How you train them is different. I think in terms of success, though, ironically, when a falcon really becomes a game hawk, a proven made bird, especially on ducks, they can pretty much become automatic. A lot of people will say, who've done duck hawking for many years, say, well, I love duck hawking, but to be honest, when a bird really figures it out, it becomes too easy. And that's why a lot of falconers will kind of go out on this journey to chase more difficult quarries like grouse.
Gotcha. Yeah. I've talked to a couple falconers, and that's like their ultimate goal is to go grouse hawking in Idaho, of all places where I live, which is kind of cool. So your sponsor, growing up, you were a little bit younger, about 16. Was there something that he told you that sticks with you still to this day that you would want to share with people getting into the sport?
No, it was interesting. I think the sponsors, they fall into two camps. There's the kind that really are prescriptive and tell you do A and B and C, and it's a very they're trying to help you succeed. But my sponsor actually, it actually wasn't Ed who took me out, but he passed me on to, or referred me on to Sterling Bennell, who was one of the first founding falconers. He was of the generation that really founded game hawking and real game hawking in terms of hunting in the United States in the 40s and 50s, along with people like a lot of people know Hans Peters is this amazing artist, but he's also a mentor of mine, who was also this generation that in the 50s and 60s, along with people like Lewis Davis, really established a culture of actually hunting and being successful with their birds. Because people don't realize, that tradition in Europe is very well founded, or in other parts of the world, in the Middle East or in Asia, was unbroken. In the United States, falconry basically, started, back early in the century, in the 20th century. It was mainly pet keepers. People weren't hunting with them. It wasn't really until, people like I mentioned, Lewis Davis. Lewis Davis showed up at the NAFA meet in Reno in 1962 with a goshawk and a peregrine and killed stuff. And a lot of people were like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you could actually do that." So
Yeah.
it was a different world back then. And anyways, getting back to your question, my sponsor was more of kind of, he just said, hey, he left it up to me to how motivated do you want to be?
Okay.
And I kind of showed him through my motivation, asking to go out or asking to go out with his friends or other people. If I said, hey, I'm interested in Merlins, do you know anyone, who's doing good with Merlins? He would he was very helpful in helping me connect with those resources. But he was a little different because he didn't push me. He never pushed
Okay.
me or even challenged me. He kind of left it up to me to how I wanted to progress, because he was very much a believer in that. It's a journey.
Yeah.
He's very philosophical that way, and unfortunately, I lost him a few years ago. But if you ask people who knew him, you'll hear some amazing
Really.
stories, that because he's quite a character.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
He's passed, but
But no, he lived. I'm sorry to lose him, but he lived one of the most full lives I think you can.
yeah.
So, I think at the end, people were just celebrating because he just, I have a picture of him, a black and white picture with him and with Maverick Godotto and in the UK in black and white,
Wow.
from like the 40s. So yeah,
No way.
yeah.
That's crazy. Very cool. Let me ask, moving on to your current bird. What are you flying right now?
So I'm flying a passage peregrine that was trapped in Arizona a couple seasons ago. A falcon, a female.
Okay. And was there a thought process to you wanted to go to Arizona for a specific one, or did you just happen
No,
to?
unfortunately, not to get into the weeds and into political subjects, but even though we have more peregrines in California than probably any state in the country, it's not legal to trap passage birds here. So I had to go to another state to get that done.
So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how long have you flown peregrines?
I'd say, there have been a couple other birds in there, but I've really focused on them for the probably close to the last 20 years. Like, my experience actually goes back a little more than 20 years ago. I don't
Oh,
want
yeah.
to making me feel old, but the majority of the last 20 years, I've really focused on peregrines. Yeah.
Okay. And normally they passage you.
No, I've kind of gone through kind of the whole variety. I started with chamber raised, parent
Okay.
raised birds, and I've never really had a preference for imprints. And there's nothing against imprints at all. It's just I think some people prefer imprints and some people don't. So I'm kind of in that group that doesn't. So I did parent raised chamber birds for quite a bit, and then I flew some wild hacked birds, and then that really opened my eyes. And then I the last few years have been doing passage birds.
Okay.
Yeah.
When you were buying the chamber raised birds, was there a specific breed that you found you had the best results with?
Obviously I focus on peregrines, but I prefer anodums.
Okay.
Anodum peregrines. It's funny. There are all these different subspecies, and you'll find it's like arguing about, Camaro versus Ford or something like that. There's
Okay.
no right answer.
Sure.
But you'll find people who will argue to their grave why peels are better, or why anodums are better, or why tundras are better. So.
Yeah.
But personally, I've always really enjoyed the anodums, both honestly because of the aesthetics, how they look, but also primarily the personality traits. They tend to be very fairly friendly, kind of
Okay.
tame temperament, calm temperament.
Yeah. And what would you say your most memorable duck hawking moment was? If it was your bird or was it someone else's?
Oh, geez. I think for duck hawking, it probably is my bird, and it wasn't necessarily the most amazing flight, but just kind of how it developed. I was out hawking with my young daughter, and she's just old enough to really keep up without me having to like constantly stress out about where she
Yeah.
was. And we were out, and we were flying at the time. We were flying a wild hacked Tiercel peels that Pete Weidner, really a breeder with a really good reputation, has. He's really known for his hacked peels birds and makes amazing birds. And we went to this pond, and this pond we'd flown many times. And of course, my daughter was out with me, and of course, what does the bird do? But it checks off and chases something outside. Thankfully, this is fairly recently, so it's in the days of GPS. So we kind of were watching the bird, on my phone, kind of screw around, and we're like, oh, and then it turned away and looked like was just basically leaving the country. So I said, okay, my daughter's name is Samantha Sam. So I said, Sam, we better go back to the truck and go pick him up. So we're starting to walk back to the truck, and then we're almost there, and I just peeked down at my phone, and the bird had basically done a U-turn. So this is one of the amazing things about GPS is that you don't necessarily, you can give them more leash, you can give them more leeway to kind of do their things without stressing out about it. And I'm watching it, and it's doing a straight line back. And so I go, oh, Sam, okay, we got to turn around. Let's go back. And we're also sadly at the stage where I think my young daughter is faster than me. So I realize that the bird's going to be in position before I actually get back to the pond. So I basically yell for my daughter. I say, Sam, run as fast as you can. And as soon as you get there, flush the ducks. So my daughter's just like turns on her little rockets, and she's running up this hill to this pond. And then, sure enough, she gets there, just as the peregrine's coming into position, and she flushes the ducks, and we saw a perfect vertical and killed the duck. So it was just a good day, and I think again, it wasn't the most amazing, mind-blowing flight ever. I can definitely think of some that were more amazing, but because it was with my daughter,
absolutely,
and that's a memory we both share, I think it means a lot.
I hope you got a picture of you two that day.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
So how did she flush him? Did she throw some rocks into the water?
Yeah. She just
cool.
Did very, very basic.
Nice. Yeah. And you don't use dogs, do you?
No, I don't. Dogs are great, but where I fly, that the ranchers can be a little skittish about using them. So I don't, but I think I recommend anybody who does have the option to use them, and the dogs are well trained, they can only help you.
Yeah. Very cool. So we kind of already talked about your bird selection. You normally like a passage, and don't plan on doing any imprints anytime soon.
No, and I should probably clarify that comment too. I really think I have a good friend who is basically devoted most of his life to flying peregrines too. So we've all combined flown a lot of different peregrines, and I think a bird doesn't have to be a passage or an imprint or a hack bird or whatever to be great. You'll get great peregrines out of no matter how you train them or no matter what their background is. I think it's just a matter of work. I've come to the place in my life where I don't necessarily honestly enjoy the training that much. I enjoy the game hawking aspect of it. So for me, the priority is on getting a bird that's going to develop and progress really fast and having a really great first season and then second season. I'm less interested in a bird that's going to take 2, 3, 4 years to develop. So my experience has been that hack birds develop a little faster than chamber raised birds, and passage birds are pretty much already there when you get them. You just need to harness it. So that's kind of the context. For the imprints, I have some good friends who love imprints. They think I'm crazy, and it's really funny because I think people tend to gravitate to one or the other, and sometimes they'll have a chamber bird or a hack bird or something. They'll ask me, I can't get this bird going, and I'm like, and I just kind of like chuckle because to me it's a lot more straightforward than imprints, because it's just a very different process, the entire process. So I think there are a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but for me, imprints I don't necessarily. To me, they're more time intensive. I think most people would agree with that. They're more time intensive in the raising process, and for me, they involve a longer development process than say a passage. So that's the main reason I have that preference.
I have heard, and I believe it was something you said through another falconer, but obviously some birds have talents and others are just not that capable. And if you trap a wild bird and you decide at this point it's just not cutting it where it should be or what your standards are, you're just not having as much progress with it, you cut it loose and get another one. Is there First of all, is that correct? Is that
Yeah, I probably did say something
Okay.
like that.
And
I think
yeah.
it's become like a cliche to say it's always the falconer's fault. If the bird's not performing, it's always the falconer. It's never the bird's fault. It's never the falconer's. And I think that's just it's almost like a PC statement. It's become, oh, that's the only statement you can say. And I honestly I think it's a little bit of bull. I think birds are individuals, and when you trap them out of the wild, for example, there's a wide range of talent. And yeah, if you put in extra work, you can draw more out of that. But then the
Sure.
question is, okay, how much is it worth it? You can take, there's some falconers who kind of they specialize, they enjoy the process of taking birds that maybe have had issues or aren't perfect and kind of fixing them. And that's fine, that's fine as long as they enjoy that. But
Yeah.
sometimes I see falconers who they don't enjoy that, and I think it's a little silly. It's like you're basically subjecting yourself to pain you don't have to have. If you have a passage bird and it doesn't look like, not all passage birds are going to be inclined to be good falconry birds. There's some species that as a whole are really inclined. Merlins are a good example. Passage merlins, I have yet to see one that didn't tame down and kind of enjoy being not to anthropomorphize, but
Sure,
they do really well in an environment, a falconry environment, where they very quickly recognize that you're not a risk to them. They very quickly recognize the value of your fleshing, and they just thrive in that environment. So I think sometimes people have birds and they're just not they're just not great for it, and instead of just letting them go, you trap a passage bird that you're banging your head for a couple days or even a couple weeks. There's no reason you can't just like let it go and fatten it up, make sure it's healthy, let it go,
Yeah.
and get another one. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like some people, like you said, would think that it is always the falconer's fault, and firmly disagree with that because there's birds at different levels and stages. So
Yeah.
I
All
think it's-
birds are individuals.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I found that myself. I think when you're really young and you're starting out in the sport, you realize you don't know anything, and then you go through this kind of middle stage where you have enough experience to really be confident in your abilities, and then you start to think, oh God, I know what I'm doing, And then I think when you get further on, you get even more experience and you see even more birds, and you realize that birds are individuals. It's really dangerous to put hard and fast rules in place, and that you really don't know as much as you think, because you start to see exceptions to these rules that you've developed in your head. So I think it's a process a lot of falconers go through, but. I tell people all the time, the more just specifically around, just think about just peregrines. It's one species, there's tons of subspecies, obviously, and there are tons of different ways to train them and so forth, but that's just one small branch of falconry.
Yeah.
And even that, what I can say is, the more I see, the more, I don't know. I've flown, a few of them, but there definitely are exceptions to a lot of the stuff that I've seen.
Yeah, I think you said it perfectly because in a lot of aspects of not just falconry, but once you are in that middle stage and you feel comfortable, like you said, you think you know enough.
Yeah.
And then that's when you start making mistakes.
Yeah.
Because you think you know it all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good to keep that open process. So I'd like to ask someone who's just getting into training a peregrine, let's say a passage, since that's what you prefer right now. Could you break down the training stages just briefly, how you would start off with a...
Yeah, I can, and I'll just qualify it in terms of there are a lot of different ways to skin a cat. So this is just one way to do it. I'm sure there are many other ways to do it, and that I think that's another thing. As falcons mature, they recognize. They're like, oftentimes people figure out, this is what works for me. But I think you do need to recognize that people are in different situations, so it may not work for someone else's situation, or they may have a different way of doing it that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But the way I do it is basically founded on the philosophy that a passage bird already knows what it's doing. It already has all of the skills in place. So all it is bringing those out in a way that's fairly fast. I do believe not to rush, but I believe not only passage birds, but I think just falconry training in general. I think the number one thing that prevents birds from becoming good game hawks that are successful in wild game is overtraining. So I think those two things kind of form the foundation of how I look at it. I try very hard. Number one, I believe that a passage bird already has, it may not have the hunting skills of a haggard, but it's out there. It's catching stuff. It basically knows what it's doing. Its flight skills are developed. It knows what it's like to feel hungry, and it's motivated to hunt and kill successfully. And then again, I combine that with the observation that I would say, geez, 90% of the birds that kind of don't reach their full potential are overtrained. So because of that's the process. So honestly, ballpark process, again, every bird's an individual, but roughly, I try to get the bird hunting, I'd say about a month maximum. And it's basically, if you just break it down to the basic steps that everyone's familiar with, the manning stage. During the manning stage, the way I do it, I do not adhere to the waking, if you will, where it's just forced exposure to the bird. I very much believe you're going to get faster, better results if every interaction is positive. Mm-hmm. So when you have a fresh trap bird, for example, if the bird doesn't want to eat and is baiting, I pop the hood on and put it away and come back later and try again later. So that's the first thing, I think. It's to make all the interactions during the manning stage positive. Maybe it's obvious, but unfortunately, I think in today's age it's not. I do believe hooding is one of the critical foundational skills to falconry, no matter what type of bird you're flying. So for falconers getting into it, that's something I would emphasize. It's like never underestimate the importance of, number one, a good fitting hood. And a lot of people will say, oh, that hood looks okay. It's like, no, if the hood bothers the bird at all, you need another hood. Mm-hmm. I understand that's a pain. It costs money. It costs time. But over the long run, you need a proper fitting hood, and you also need to know how to put it on. So that's the manning stage. Typically, it should not take that long. The next stage is obviously doing. One thing I will say about falcons, a very small detail, but it can potentially save you a day or two. There's no real reason to actually hop the falcon to your fist.
Okay.
Because that comes along, that develops naturally. There's really no need. And so really all you need to do is just basically gain it eating barehooded. And then you can go straight to, short flights. On the crayons, I do use a crayons. I think the crayons, I've referred to it as the tool of the devil because it can result, no matter how well you plan, things can go wrong. So to be honest, I minimize it completely. I don't also have them come long distances. During going to free flight, achieving free flight, that's probably 1 to 2 weeks at the most, ideally more like 1 week. And I emphasize, and this is just basic falconry, this isn't anything special about me. It's all about emphasizing response, not distance. Mm-hmm. And I think people, especially younger falconers, get hung up in distance. I think, well, the bird, what happens if it's further? And no, it's about response distance. As soon as the bird is coming, 15, 20 yards to me, probably even shorter, to be honest, maybe 10 yards or so, I get rid of the crayons. Okay. So the crayons ideally is only on the bird for a handful of flights, not a long time. And then once you're so at this point the bird is basically free flying, and peregrines specifically are inclined to wait on. So people oftentimes freak out because the bird flies past you when it's first starting to free fly, and that's perfectly normal. It's going to turn if for no other reason than to say, hey, what's going on over there? And then you just simply start a process of rewarding the bird with a lure or game or so forth. So once the bird's free flying, you can very easily go from one circle above your head at 20 feet to 300 feet, and say, 4 or 5 circles in a matter of 2 or 3 flights.
Oh,
So
quick.
it happens once it clicks in the bird's head that, hey, I'm going to look at that guy and something good is going to happen. It develops very fast. And then honestly, this is where the stage where I think a lot of falconers fall apart is they think they just need to keep training them, and things come into place like either launching farm raised game or the drone. The drone, to be honest, I think the drone is an amazing tool that can be used by people who understand both its strengths and weaknesses. But I've seen more falcons ruined on the drone than any other single factor. Wow. So that stage when the bird at this point is waiting on, not high, a couple 100 feet, I go to wild game.
Okay.
And I found and both, not just with passage birds, but with passage birds and wild hack birds and chamber birds, they will typically kill within their first, I'd say, 2 to 5 flights.
Okay. So do you have bags every time in the very beginning to try and reinforce the positive if you don't have anything to flush?
Early on, yes, I do. Yeah, because early on, I'm not in an environment where there's wild game. So I have something to reward them, even if that's as basic as throwing a frozen duck out.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
All right. So the manning process, you said, how long? Like 1-2 weeks?
Yeah,
at the most.
Yeah. I'd say I try not to break it down into steps that discrete. I think the whole process I think is roughly a month.
Roughly a month.
It can be a week or even 2 shorter. It can be a week or 2 longer. But roughly, because again, birds are individuals and sometimes they get hung up on one stage more than others. But I think the big thing to remember is to get your bird game hawking as fast as you can. Now, what I will say in here that is specifically for what we're talking about, peregrines, is I don't fly tundra birds. So I'm speaking on this not from my personal experience, but just from what friends and acquaintances have said, is that tundra birds do have a stronger dispersal, kind of hardwired into them. They have that dispersal. So they do tend to kind of go walkabout, if you will, earlier. So typically, I know my friends who fly those birds have a little bit of a tighter leash, so they may possibly go a little slower. But I haven't found that issue. But again, like that, I'm speaking in an area where I'm not really qualified to speak.
Well, that's okay.
Yeah,
it's good to have advice from people that have experience. So when you're out with your new peregrine and it's going up and it has one of those moments where it wants to check out something. Obviously, now that we have GPS, we can kind of monitor that. Mm-hmm. But before that, what would you do? Like if your bird started getting out of sight and you had binoculars, and would you obviously get a little bit worried? But what was your process of retrieval if something, if you couldn't see the bird?
Yeah, I think there are 2 important things that they consider in that situation. So the first one is where is the bird in kind of its development stage. Okay. So a bird that is made, if you will, that knows what it's supposed to do. Obviously you're going to give the bird more a leash than a bird that is on its second or third free flight.
Yeah.
A second, third free flight. You're going to be concerned and rightly try to get control of that situation pretty fast. It does go back to where the falconer can help in that, though, is I apologize, selection of their slips.
Oh, yeah.
Selection of their slips. I really emphasize that people, when you're training longwingers especially, they refer to brown birds in their passage birds. When you're training a brown bird, I found that the best way to kind of guarantee a smooth development process for that bird is to be very, very selective in their slips early on. So when I first put a bird up over wild game, it's a very clean, easy slip. And then as they get more developed, as they get more skilled, then you increase that to harder slips, and then you challenge them more. But it's on if a falconer basically has only the slips where there's check everywhere and they don't have easy slips, that's not good. That's poor planning on the falconer before they even get the bird. They have to have those. they have to have enough slips where you can do that, where you can be selective about, okay, I'm going to start this bird on easy controlled slips, wide open situation. There's pretty much probably only what I want to flush there. There's not a lot of check in the vicinity and so forth. So I think those things come into play. So to get back to answer your question, what do I do when they go around, it fly off? It depends on where they are. Can I trust this bird, or can I not trust this bird at all because it's basically not barely trained? But there is a balance, because one of the things, especially for falconers who are new to longwings, that I guarantee it's almost every new longwinger I've seen is there's a tendency to exert too much control.
Yeah.
And there's a saying among longwingers, which is basically like, let your bird fly. And it's exactly what it means. It's like, you have to let your bird fly. You have to let your bird kind of spread its wings, eat some sky. And it's not all going to be right above you like you want it. So sometimes they're going to fly out to the horizon and turn around and come back. Sometimes they may even get distracted by check. They may see a starling flock or a blackbird flock and get distracted by that. But you need to let them fly. If your impulse is to, as soon as things get a little out of control, call your bird down, you're not going to have a good bird.
That's great advice, yeah. Because that's initially, you worry, you don't want your bird to fly
Exactly.
off. So
Exactly.
kind of just let them figure it out. So you mentioned probably the most difficulty people have is they overtrain. Is there a certain aspect where you've just seen, birds get ruined over some certain technique that they keep instilling, or just common mistakes as far as?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things there. One is there's I'm just going to speak to peregrines right now, because it's very different for other types of falcons. But for peregrines, there's something what I refer to is the basic program, and the basic program is we walk out to the field with the bird hooded. I take that hood off, and that bird knows it needs to ring up above me, so it needs to fly up, take a pitch above me, and then it also knows when it's at an appropriate height, I'm going to go in and produce a flush for it, and it's going to get a clean shot at game. So the bird has to go up, it has to come over, and it has to come down and kill the game. So the 3 steps, as basic as it gets. Mm-hmm. And when people get away to kind of just instilling that very, very basic process, I think they get off track. If a bird doesn't know that, so if a bird thinks its job is to, when it gets released, to look at the drone up in the sky and just chase the drone and get that, and that becomes its purpose, its primary drive, it's a problem. So that's an example, for example, where if a bird is kept on the drone too long, that becomes its purpose, not going up and coming over you. If a bird is just simply trained too long to where it doesn't see wild game, it basically thinks, well, the hood's gonna come off, I'm gonna fly around for a little, and then that monkey on the ground is going to throw a lure out, and I'm going to get my meal. That becomes its primary purpose.
Yeah.
So so if I had one piece of advice, it's that get your bird hunting, and I think it's obviously we're talking about peregrines here, but that I think philosophy holds for pretty much any species you're going to fly. Get your bird hunting, and success on hunting is going to reinforce good behavior.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people will get hung up on how high their bird goes, and they say, "Oh, I can't get them above 1,000. I can't get them above 2,000 feet." Do you worry about that?
I don't, but that's just my personal preference. I tell people all the time, decide what makes you happy and do that. If you want your bird up out of sight, 2,000 feet up, that's awesome. Do that.
Yeah.
If you don't care if your bird's killing from 150, 200 feet, do that. It's really it's obviously kind of a peer pressure kind of thing that kind of comes into play, but do what makes you happy. The one thing I will say is where I do firmly believe is I believe in hunting success before pitch. There are falconers who will very much disagree with that, who think the critical step is to get your bird high before you even start hunting. I don't agree with that. Mm-hmm. So there is, I think, a break. There are different schools to that. My priority is always to get the bird up to enough pitch where it can kill successfully. And honestly, the first 6 to 12 head, I honestly don't care how high it is.
Okay.
Once I get to that process where, okay, the bird's killing, then I do care. Because I personally, I like my birds, between, and it also comes into play where you're flying. There are parts of the country where you can't have a high flying bird just because of the terrain and the setup. I don't care what you do. If you do, it's not going to catch anything.
Okay.
So, and there are parts of the country where both the weather conditions and the terrain really encourage a high flying bird. So those come into play as well. But I always try to get the bird high enough to kill. I get it having success. I really try to get them up to that, anywhere from 6 to 12 head very quickly. And then from there, I start imposing discipline. And I try to get my birds up. Typically, what I shoot for is kind of like 500 to 1,500 feet. I think at 500 feet, you can have a nice, proper vertical stoop, but you don't have to have wide open country to do it. Once you start talking about 1,000, 1,500 feet, there are a lot of slips you're not going to be able to fly because there just isn't enough space for the game to clear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how do you get your bird to go up higher? Do you just wait a little bit longer? Like, is it a little bit more patience before you flush?
It's patience and luck and positive reinforcement.
Okay.
So it all comes into play. The luck comes into play in terms of, you don't have outside influences come into play, like you don't have wild peregrines, or you don't have the birds going off on shack. And some birds are just high flyers. One of the things, with peregrines that anyone who's flown peregrines know is tearcels naturally fly higher than falcons. So some birds are just going, and then within each one, some individuals are just going to have a tendency to fly big, and some aren't.
Okay.
So there's just that individual component that honestly is independent of the falconer. But then where the falconer, it boils down to discipline. So I'll just give you an example. I have a very good friend, falconer, well-known falconer in the community, Sean Hayes, probably one of the most disciplined falconers I know. He's been successful with pretty much everything he's trained. And I was out hawking with him once at a meet, and he wasn't flying a peregrine. He's flying a GP, but the same principle applies.
Okay.
We had a great slip, went out, walked out. He unhoods his bird. Bird takes off, takes a pitch, flying up. It got up to just about, I think, like 900 feet, which for most falconers is, 99 out of 100 falconers is going to be happy with that pitch. Mm-hmm. And he basically looks up, swears to himself, throws out a lure, and calls his bird down. Because for him, he wanted his birds higher. Oh. He wanted his birds up, 1,000, 1,200 feet. And that was a bird that had a history of going up, so he knew he could do it, 1,000, 1,200 feet. But he wasn't happy, so he called that bird down. And for him, that it was important to preserve that standard, if you will.
Gotcha. Okay.
Personally, I would have flushed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't need that. But then again, it comes down to individual preferences. But I'm not going to flush if the bird is 100 or 150 feet up. I'm going to want that bird. Like I said, what I shoot for is 500 to 1,200. But do I sometimes flush slower? Absolutely.
Yeah.
So. But you need to maintain that discipline if you want a high flying bird, and sometimes it's very hard because you wake up, you get up at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, you drive out, it's dark, it's cold, you're kind of grumpy, and then you get a great slip, and you put your bird up, and the bird doesn't go up the way you'd like, and then you have a question. It's like, do I flush or do I don't?
Yeah.
If the bird isn't where you want it to be and you do flush, don't blame that bird for not going up, because you're reinforcing that behavior.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you said it was very important for slip selection. For someone just starting in duck hawking, what's an ideal spot where you would start at to, find a good spot to flush for their first introduction?
I guess in terms of duck slips, the dynamics are pretty straightforward. Generally, the smaller the water, the easier it's going to be. Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you're not going to want a slip where there's a lot of check. So, you want to avoid places where it's going to be distracted or tempted. So if there's pigeons at a barn right next to there, that's probably not great. And then the third thing is, the species of ducks. Some ducks are easier to catch than others. Once a duck hawk is made, it really doesn't matter what duck it is, but especially early on, like small divers are going to be easier than a mallard.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, good. That's good stuff. So are there any, I know some falconers have strict parameters, like that they just won't break, like, whether it's the time of day or the weight or the temperature even, or, the place location. If you change one or two or more of those, they just say it's not going to be effective. Do you have any strict rules like that?
I wouldn't say there's strict rules, but they're definitely guidelines. I think definitely falcons tend to be more sensitive than hawks at time of day. So I always fly, and a lot of falconers are like this, either fly at first light or right before dark.
Okay.
The hunting drive is definitely the strongest at those points in the day. And not only the hunting drive, but the air quality, especially in the morning, is usually the best. People, I think dirt hawkers probably don't think about things like air quality so much. That's something like longwingers do a lot of thinking about. They think about, okay, how dry is the air? What's the air density like? Because the denser the air, the easier it is for them to go up. Mm-hmm. So there are parts of the country, even in parts of the day, where the birds can go up. Later in the day, it typically warms up. It's not as good air, and the birds often don't go as high. So that's why longwingers often want that light right at first light. Okay. So definitely time of day is a pretty big consideration. I'd say not all, but most falcons who fly big longwings fly either first thing in the morning or right before dark. And in terms of changing place and like that, what I encourage is just understand if you're going to fly in the same place at the same time every day, when you take that bird to a strange place at a different time, it's probably not going to be as smooth.
Yeah.
So there's a balancing act you have to play. And I think what I do is I tend to, when they're very early on, I will train them in one field until they're basically going up high enough to kill. Then I will probably put them on the same 2 or 3 ponds that are quite easy, and let them kind of get going in terms of having success hunting. And then I start to vary it. To be honest, I try not to vary the time. I don't fly my birds in the middle of the afternoon. The one exception is if I'm training a bird specifically to thermal. Mm-hmm. Thermaling is a technique where you're taking advantage of those natural thermals that we call it the elevator, because it's kind of the lazy way to go up. Mm-hmm. They can take a thermal bird can take an elevator and be up out of sight in minutes. Unless I'm thermaling, I typically stick to the early and late windows. But I definitely encourage gradually exposing your bird to different locations, so that because nobody wants to go on a 1,000-mile road trip.
No.
and let their bird go and have it land on a fence post.
What's the farthest you've had to track down one of your birds?
I don't know if it's far distance-wise. I think the farthest. Trust me, I have lots of friends that have tracked birds way further. I have friends who've gotten in planes and tracked them across states. Yikes. But for me, I've been a little more fortunate. I think the farthest I recovered a bird was about 25 miles in a straight line, but it was literally on top of a forested mountain, so it wasn't much fun. I actually located it, and it couldn't see me though, so I had to wait a couple of days until it flew out into the valley, and then I got her back. But
wow.
But especially with the technology available today, those things are become more and more rare. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, like GPS has really made recovery a lot easier.
Definitely. 25 miles, that's nothing.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive in itself. Oh, man. So can you go through the difference? Well, you've already gone through your training routine. How about your hunting routine? Like starting from the morning and what you do, and then basically your normal.
Yeah, I guess I don't think there's anything super complicated about it. I do tend to fly the birds at first light. Mm-hmm. The only thing I think is a consideration that some people don't may not be at the top of their heads is where they are in terms of processing their food. So
Oh.
I feed them in a way. So for example, I feed them. I always try to feed them in the morning, so that the next day their gut is pretty much empty.
Okay.
Because a bird with that's gone through and processed all their food is going to be a little more motivated than a bird where it's only halfway through. So sometimes it's hard. For example, switching back and forth between flying in the morning and flying in the evening, because if you fly say you have an afternoon flight and you feed the bird, a lot of times it's not going to be done processing that food in the morning. That's the only consideration. But I go and pick them up. You go out to the pond, and again, this is why hooding is so important. As soon as that hood pops up, the bird knows what it's supposed to do.
Okay. Very cool. So when you have a falcon, are you normally, like, if let's say you train a falcon and you just love it, is there a certain time period where you're still going to release it and go trap another one, or is it more of just a feel?
Yeah, I think that's one of the cooler things about flying passage birds is the option to kind of let them go. The current falcon I have, she has 2 seasons under her belt, and my plan is probably to fly 2 to 3 more and then let her go.
Okay.
But that's completely a falconer preference.
Just based off your feel.
Yeah.
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 Okay. That's very cool. What do you think? You've trained hawks before.
Yeah.
But what's the main difference, do you think? Because obviously they have different tendencies.
Yeah.
What do you think the difference is between a hawk and a falcon in training? And
So I'm going to qualify this because I've never flown accipiters. So I'm just going to.
All right.
To me, honestly, the people who are highly successful with accipiters can train anything, because it requires such detail and discipline that I think a lot of the greatest, most skilled falconers focus on accipiters. But so I'm going to put that aside. So I'm
Okay.
not talking about accipiters. I'm just talking about bootias and so forth. I think the difference is when you start flying longwings, there's more of an emphasis on the aesthetics of it, so the pitch. So when you start focusing on pitch, there's this fine balance between control and letting your bird kind of spread its wings, if you will. So that's the big difference, and it becomes a little bit less about putting game in the bag than getting that flight.
Okay.
A lot of falcons. Don't get me wrong. I love game hawking, and I love going home with a duck in the vest. But a lot of longwingers will talk about the flight. It's like it's about getting that great flight where the bird just takes a pitch with conviction. Just gets up there, and you get to see this amazing teardrop. Whether the bird closes the deal or not. So there's a little more, I think. I don't want to put words into the dirt hawker crowd's mouths, but I think there's a little more emphasis on that, the aesthetics of the flight.
Yeah, I
versus
could see that for sure.
Putting game in the bag. Yeah.
So have you had specific challenges, whether it would be training or preventative care or injuries, stuff like that pops up that really you just had to?
Yeah. I think if you fly long, I mean, falconry is not for the faint of heart, and sometimes you get lucky and you get a good stretch of you can get like 10, 15 years where everything seems to go fairly smoothly, but at some point, if you fly long enough, bad stuff is going to happen. So I think it's just having the ability to get back up and dust yourself off, and even when you feel like crap. And I've definitely had stuff like that happen. For me, the big things have been fence strikes. Unfortunately, I fly in a part of the country where fences are going to be there, and it's just a part of the risk you have. And some falcons are really good at avoiding fences, and some aren't. I've had falcons that I've literally retired because they showed me that they could not avoid the fences. But fences can kill. I've been fortunate that I've never had a bird killed by a fence, but I've had multiple birds hit fences. So fences are a big one. I think things happen to your bird. Predation obviously is something we always deal with. In some parts of the country, it's golden eagles. We do have issues with eagles. I've had friends locally who've lost birds to eagles, but it's a bigger issue with red tails.
Yeah.
The red tails in this part of the country at a certain time of year can be really bad. So and then in terms of medical issues. I've definitely had birds get sick. So I, no matter how proactive you are in taking care of your birds, at some point you're going to have birds get sick. So you need to understand how to recognize the primary maladies and how to treat those.
Yeah.
And in terms of vet care, a lot of falconers understandably don't trust vets because they tend to manhandle them because they're not familiar with handling them in the clinic. What I would recommend is find a vet that understands raptor medicine and you trust handling enough, because my experience has been, do not wait. If you think that there's something serious going on, get your bird into a vet, because literally, hours for a lot of raptor diseases can matter. I'm thinking specifically about things like Asper, for example.
Yeah.
Asper, the medicine has gotten a lot better, but it doesn't matter if you don't get them on it fast.
Okay. So do you have a different approach when you're introducing new game? Like if you're trying to introduce a new, let's say going from ducks to grouse or something like that, is that a complete game changer? Or
it's very different. I've done that. That's one of the things I'm looking forward to doing more. I think over the next few years is I've got a few friends kind of out in the Intermountain region, so I'm planning on doing more uplands for sure. And they're harder.
Yeah.
They're harder, and but I don't think, I think the thought process remains the same. Whereas you're going to want to introduce them to easier slips early.
Okay.
Then I don't think you're gonna. I mean, who knows? You could be lucky and you can have an amazing hawk, but the best plan probably isn't to put your bird right up over winter hardened grouse the first thing.
Yeah.
So
I would imagine you'd like having a dog for
for uplands you need a dog.
Yeah.
For uplands you need a dog.
Otherwise,
yeah.
you're going to be sitting there for quite a while.
Yeah.
I got to ask one more training question because this always comes to mind. I have people that tell me stories when they have a problem with their falcon landing constantly. So what would you tell that person?
First, don't beat yourself up.
Okay. Okay.
What I'll say is anyone who says their falcons never land is a liar. So that's the first thing I'll say. Everybody has had falcons land, and they land for a variety of reasons. And the thing about landing is if it gets to be a pattern, the more it gets to be a pattern, the harder it is to fix.
Yeah.
So the earlier you get on it, the better. It's all about just literally keeping your bird in the air. And even if it's baby steps, if you know you've got a falcon that's prone to land, do not give it that extra leash where it's going to land. If you can tell, that bird is looking at that tree, or that bird is looking at that pole, or it's just going to land on the ground, get it down before it actually lands.
Okay.
Because there are many different ways to address a bird that's landing. Some of the ones people are familiar with is kind of the tossing pigeons to get them to keep them in there. That's one that's one of the old school ones that's been around forever. But there are many. There's drones, there's balloons, there's all sorts of ways to address it. But my overarching advice would be, don't let it become a pattern, because if you let it become a pattern, it's going to be a pain in the butt to break.
Yeah. So are you trying to avoid a bird like that? Obviously, places and perches and stuff that's around, you just want to try and take it out somewhere where it is a lot more difficult for it to land.
Yeah, you would. The other thing before I miss this thought though is landing can be driven by, there are a couple big factors that sometimes, especially newer falconers, may not think about. It can be sickness. The vet always thinks it's sickness. So it is, you need to be balanced about it. But I've taken birds to the vet because I thought there was something going on, and of course they're always like, yes, the bird is sick, that's why the bird's landing, and that's not always true. Okay, so but it is a possibility. If a bird that never lands really suddenly starts landing, I would actually say, is there something wrong with this bird? So it can be a health issue. The other thing that is very common is people fly later into the season, breeding hormones start to kick in, and and that's not an uncommon thing. You'll see, especially female, you'll see falcons that not less so on the tiercells, but even tiercells will start to act goofy too. So you'll see some odd behavior late in the season due to kind of breeding condition.
Okay, that makes sense. Did you have any falconry books that you would recommend to someone enthusiast about duck hawking?
Well, it's actually not about duck hawking, but it's about peregrines. I think the best book by far, at least in the modern era, I'll limit it to kind of the modern era, is Game Hawk, Field and More by Turner. I think it's not a lengthy book. It's actually a very succinct book, but like every word in that book has meaning, and it's principles. I think it's might be a book that's a little harder for newer falconers to really appreciate as much, but I think especially people who've been flying falcons for a long time find some amazing wisdom in there. It's more about principles than how to.
Yeah.
It's about principles in terms of how do you make a great game hawk. How do you what is the philosophy behind it, and what are the principles to getting clean slips and achieving consistent healthy pitch and so forth. So that's the one book. It's not the easiest to get, I understand, but it's well worth it if you're serious about learning about really flying any falcon from a pitch.
That's great. Who is your favorite falconer that you have?
Oh God, there are a lot. There are the thing about the internet today is it makes you aware how many really good falconers there are out there. So it's amazing, and it's also amazing because I think the biggest challenge now isn't. It's not how it was when I was a kid. The big thing was getting access to good birds, and that's not an issue now. Now it's easier than ever to get access to birds. Now it's about basically having the right slips in the land and the time to do it. So, but getting back to your question, I'd say Hubert Quaid is someone who I really admire. He's he doesn't do a lot of self promotion, but
where is he located?
He's in Idaho.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he kind of quietly goes about his thing, but he's probably to me one of the greatest game hawkers, at least in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like a very cool
yeah
guy.
yeah no and yeah.
Nice. So let's talk about if you could fly any bird, what would it be?
I think it's kind of what I'm doing. It's passage peregrines. I guess I might, if I could fly anything, I would like to try a hag. I've heard some stories from the old timers about how those are, but I think I'm very, very happy with passage peregrines. I guess there are probably some subspecies that aren't available in the U.S. that I'd be interested in trying, but I'm very, very happy with passage and autumn specifically.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's good. What is it that you kind of get out of falconry when you're out there? What is your experience?
It's I think it's nothing unique. I think I'm out there. The reason a lot of falconers are out there, it's about doing something that you really get joy of in that moment. It's when you're out there, and don't get me wrong, when things are not going well. Unfortunately, my daughter's been exposed to a lot of language she shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
My friends will tell you, yeah, you want to hear some profanity. I'm probably that guy when things aren't going good. But I think it's about doing something you truly enjoy, gain joy in that moment, and you can enjoy it in the moment. That's what it's always been for me.
Okay, nice. Do you see falconry taking you anywhere else other than Northern California where you're at now? Are you planning on relocating?
I'm a Bay Area kid, so I'll probably always have a place here. But I am spending more time kind of in grouse country and doing uplands. So that's probably when I get older and have more time too, I'll probably do more of that as well.
Okay, awesome. Now, is there anything you can think off the top of your head, someone that would be just getting in would have any questions that we might have missed, any topics before we wrap up?
That's a good question. I think the one specific piece of advice I would give someone getting in is don't rely on your sponsor for all of your learning and knowledge and information. I think it's fine having that person be the primary, because if you don't, you have, you know, a billion different voices telling you a billion different things. So I understand that. But I think what I've seen from a lot of the amazing young, great falconers come up is they're not just looking to their apprentice for learning. They're looking at a broader set of people. So what I would say is seek out people who are doing things well and learn from them. And if you know, for example, you know, hey, I want to fly goshawks, you know, find some people who are really good at that and spend time from them. Because I think I learned a lot of my falconry, honestly, not by people telling me what to do, but by just watching.
Yeah.
You know, watching people who were already successful at it. So that's the piece of advice I'd give is, you know, find people who are not only good at it, but nice people and pleasant people to be around.
Yeah,
in the old days, there were a lot fewer falconers, number one, and there was harder to get in touch with them. So people would tolerate a lot. I mean, there's a joke that, you know, people would, you know, basically get their apprentices to do all their manual labor at their house and things. You hear those stories. I think it's just, you know, that would be my advice. You know, really look around, find falconers who are doing things. They're successful at it. They clearly know what they're doing, and learn from them. Don't just think like everything, you know, your sponsor is the end all. Because to be honest, I've seen many people. A lot of the best falconers I know didn't have great sponsors.
Yeah,
a lot of them, you know, did not have good sponsors. But what they did have was they had the drive to learn, the drive to get better, and the motivation to kind of seek out people who were very successful at what they wanted to learn and then learning from them.
Yeah. This is a high failure sport, especially in the beginning. You're failing constantly with little tiny things and learning from it. Yeah. I mean, nobody is just that good in the very beginning. So it's definitely great advice. I want to thank you for doing this podcast with me. And I hope that you guys enjoyed the content. Please give a like and subscribe for more of these types of videos. And, you know, if you want to watch Eric, he's on Instagram, Eric Ariyoshi. You can check out his videos or his pictures and kind of his journey. But I definitely enjoy Eric. I know he's very, very good at what he does. I've heard a lot of good things about him, and I hope that I'll be able to go out with him one day and see, his bird catch a duck right in my
absolutely.
face. I would love that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah. No, thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Okay.
That was perfect, man. You were awesome.